The next item up is a proclamation. This is an item in the matter of proclaiming Klamath County's support for rights guaranteed by the Constitution and supported specifically by the Fourth Amendment. We support and proclaim our support for these amendments and rights in the Constitution here in Klamath County, Oregon. There is a recommended motion to proclaim Klamath County's support for rights as guaranteed by the Constitution and supported specifically by the Fourth Amendment in Klamath County. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion?
Maybe a discussion. Many of us take some of our rights for granted, and until someone, especially our government, seems to step in and infringe upon our rights, everybody sits by and lets them do it. This is one of those issues I think we, as a local government, I think, and as citizens, we need to step up and say, no, this is not correct. This is something that we need to stand up and say we don't agree with it. I don't agree with it personally, politically and personally both. So I think our Fourth Amendment is very sacred and should be held very closely as our founding fathers did. They experienced a lot of those things that were dealt with in the Fourth Amendment, and this really infringes upon those rights as citizens, and I feel very strongly against that direction.
For the record, let me read the proclamation. This is a proclamation for Klamath County support for these rights, which are guaranteed. And I will read, whereas Klamath County is not a, quote, battlefield or subject to, quote, the laws of war. And whereas Federal Judge Catherine Forrest has ruled Section 1021 of the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act is actually unconstitutional, and whereas the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that neither Congress nor the President can constitutionally authorize the detention and/or disposition of any person within the United States or any citizen of the United States, quote, under the law of war, quote, who is not serving in, quote, the land, naval forces, or in the militia when in actual service of time of war or public danger, close quote. That is referenced specifically in Ex parte Milligan 71 of the U.S. Code. And whereas the purposes of this revolution, the terms arrest and capture and detention under the law of war and disposition under the law of war and law of war are used in the same sense and shall have the same meaning as such terms in the 2012 NDAA, or National Defense Authorization Act, Section 1021, paragraph C, and therefore be it proclaimed that notwithstanding any treaty, federal, state, or local, or authority enacted or claimed, including but not limited to an authorization for the use of military force, National Defense Authorization Act, or any similar law or authority enacted or claimed by Congress or the office of the President, directed at any person in Klamath County who is not serving in, quote, the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger, close quote, is in fact unconstitutional and therefore unlawful. It is unlawful for any person to arrest or capture any person in Klamath County or any citizen of Klamath County within the United States with the intent of detention under the law of war, or any person actually subject to Klamath County under the disposition of the law of war, or subject any person or target, or any person or targeted killing in Klamath County or citizens of Klamath County within the United States. And be it further proclaimed that Klamath County requests the state legislature to recognize the duty of the state of Oregon to interpose itself between the unconstitutional usurpations of the federal government or its agents and the people of this state, as well as to defend the inalienable rights of all the people, which is consistent with our oaths to defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Oregon against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And be it further proclaimed that Klamath County requests our congressional delegation to commence immediately with efforts to repeal the unconstitutional sections of the 2012 NDAA, to wit, sections 1021 and 1022, and any other provision which will have the same or substantially the same effect on any person in the United States not serving in the land, naval forces, or militia when in time of war. And finally, be it proclaimed that Klamath County requests our congressional delegation to introduce, support, and secure the passage of legislation which clearly states that Congress not only does not authorize, but in fact prohibits the use of military force, military detention, military trial, extraordinary rendition, and the use of any other power under the law of war against any person in the United States not serving in land, naval, militia, or other service during time of war. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the Klamath County Board of Commissioners and the people of Klamath County support the rights guaranteed by our Constitution and supported specifically by the Fourth Amendment to that Constitution in Klamath County, Oregon, done and dated this 24th day of September 2013. That is pretty windy proclamation, and I apologize for all the legalese. But the legalese basically objects to a very simple concept with regard to our rights as citizens, and we simply are asking our state legislature as well as our congressional representatives, both in the Senate and in the House, to support those rights to their fullest extent. So, after reading that, any other questions?
Another comment. I think we've seen just a continual short steps towards encroachment upon our rights as citizens, and this is just another example of that from our federal government. We're just a county government. What can we do? Well, we can proclaim this as our position, and we aren't the only local government that's doing this. This is being done all over the nation. And I think this needs to gather steam. I think our federal government and our state government needs to be kept in check. That's what our founding fathers put that Fourth Amendment out there for, is to keep them in check to an extent. And this NDAA wasn't necessarily all a bad piece of legislation. It's normally does funding of the military and things like that, but they slip in little things like this that a lot of citizens just don't. Who's going to read a lot of this legislation? Well, unfortunately, we have other people in the nation that really keep up on this and really raise a red flag. And I think this is something that we need to help carry that red flag and get it put back in check. And the thought of, I asked rather jokingly this morning if Kingsley Field had a brig. Will that be where we will be housing people that, as it says, I think any person who has committed a belligerent act, undefined belligerent act? Well, I think the recent reclassification of many citizens as combatants and so forth, really, we all classify as that almost. If you belong to the Tea Party, if you have a concealed carry permit, if you have a weapon, if you've raised your voice any place, I think you're considered a combatant and is probably looking at possibly be considered as creating a belligerent act of some sort. That's all they need under this wording. And logic says, oh, they would never do that. How many times have we heard that before? So I think we need to state our opinion and gather with those others around the nation that are doing the same thing.
Very good. Tom's point is well taken. The words are not defined, and quite frankly, Tom, I find your conversation this morning quite belligerent.
Oh, good. Tell Frank to come and get me. Oh, Frank's being belligerent in Salem right now, so he can't do that.
All in favor of approving, yes, more comments.
I have, I just wanted to give a little history
Okay.
about why the Fourth Amendment and about the Fourth Amendment and how it came to be. It actually is not an amendment to the original Constitution. It is an amendment to the Bill of Rights, which is a part of the Constitution. The full text of the Constitution is the original Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And then there's subsequent amendments, and then actually the unsuccessful amendments are part of the full text of the Constitution. And there was a few amendments that were not ratified by the states. But the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution is part of the Bill of Rights that prohibits unreasonable search and seizures and requires any warrant to be judicially sanctioned and supported by probable cause. It was adopted in response to the abuse of the writ of assistance, a type of general search warrant issued by the British government and a major source of tension in pre-revolutionary America. The Fourth Amendment is introduced in Congress in 1789 by James Madison, along with other amendments in the Bill of Rights, in the response to anti-federalist objection to the new Constitution. So there was people in the states that did not like the new Constitution because it did not include a lot of the rights of the citizens. Congress submitted the amendment to the states on September 28, 1789, and it took 3/4 of the states to ratify it. It was about 2 years later, on December 15, 1791, that Virginia was the last state of the 3/4 of the states to actually ratify it, and so it actually became law. On March 1st, 1792, about 4 months later, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson announced the adoption of the amendment. And it's quite interesting to research the Constitution and how these amendments and how the actual Constitution was written, and the way the people back then, when they wrote the Constitution, actually arrived at their thoughts. And it goes way back to the thoughts that the Europeans had years and years before that. And it's fascinating where they get their ideas. And that was only 222 years ago from today. I'm 65 years old, and it was only 157 years or something like that they actually passed that amendment before I was born. So, you know, you look at the history of mankind, and it wasn't that long ago that they wrote very important documents that I think the whole world looks up to today. So that's a little history of the Fourth Amendment, but if you want to Google it, it's interesting to get the full story and why they thought that the Bill of Rights needed to be in the Constitution, and why they needed some amendments to those Bill of Rights.
Very good. Tom, it looks like you have some.
Yeah, I wanted to quote just a couple of other sentences, and I think you touched on them in the proclamation, or we touched on there a little bit. Just a couple of sections parts out of Section 1021. Detention under the law of war without trial until the end of hostilities. These are just general provisions in here about what to do with belligerent citizens, I guess you might say. transfer for trial by an alternative court or competent tribunal having lawful jurisdiction, transfer to the custody or control of the person's country of origin or other foreign country or any other foreign entity. And then the last one I'm going to quote here is kind of a contradictory statement, I thought. It says, nothing in this section shall be construed to affect existing law. I think everything in here goes against existing law. So I think that's a very contradictory statement that they have in this section 1021. So I find it very offensive personally and as a citizen that our government is trying to, I will call it, slip through things like this that unfortunately oftentimes do get put under the radar, so to speak, that the citizens just don't realize they're doing. So we're acting as best we can against this.
Just for the record, neither of these gentlemen read the Fourth Amendment. I'll read it just so you have context. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So in terms of your person, your house, your papers, and effects, I think that probably even covers electronic data that is attached in your emails and being transmitted back and forth as you look for a potato cooker at Walmart online. So any other comments? No other comments. We will, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor of supporting this proclamation, please signify by saying aye.
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 The chair votes aye, and the motion passes. The proclamation passes.